They underestimated him, dismissed him, and treated him like a fool, until he exposed a legal fraud right in front of the judge. The courtroom was already against him before he even spoke. Ethan Caldwell stepped forward, his suit a little too worn, his tie slightly off-center, but his posture steady. He wasn't a lawyer, never claimed to be. He was just a man who refused to let his grandmother's home be stolen by a corporate machine that saw people as nothing more than numbers on a balance sheet. Judge William Grayson peered over his glasses, the corners of his mouth twitching in something that wasn't quite a smirk, but wasn't far from it either. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his gavel lightly on the bench. "Mr. Caldwell, representing yourself?" The question dripped with amusement. Ethan met his gaze. "Yes, Your Honor." A chuckle echoed from the other side of the room. Nathan Sterling, the opposing attorney, adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate ease, a corporate bulldog with a track record of steamrolling small-time defendants. Sterling was here to do what he did best, win. And Ethan? He wasn't even a challenge. "This should be quick," Sterling muttered under his breath to his assistant, who gave a knowing smile. Ethan heard it. He was supposed to hear it. That was the point. But he kept his face still. He'd been counted out before. He knew what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated. That's why he was here. The judge let out a sigh, flipping through a file. "This is a property dispute, correct? A foreclosure challenge?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir. My grandmother's home." Grayson barely glanced at him. "And you believe you can argue this case against a seasoned attorney like Mr. Sterling?" Ethan didn't flinch. "I don't believe, Your Honor." "I know." The courtroom went quiet. A few muffled chuckles came from the corporate side of the room, but there was something else too, something unspoken. The kind of silence that comes when someone unexpected refuses to back down. Judge Grayson shook his head. "Very well. Let's get on with it." But Ethan wasn't just here to argue. He was here to win. And they had no idea what was coming. The judge's skepticism was only the beginning. The real challenge was about to come from the man sitting across the aisle, the one who thought Ethan had already lost. Nathan Sterling adjusted his tie with a smug smile. This was his playground. The courtroom. The rules. The strategy. He had crushed dozens like Ethan Caldwell before. A man with no degree, no firm backing him, no experience. This wasn't a case. It was a warm-up. Judge Grayson exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed with your opening statement." Sterling rose with practiced ease, buttoning his jacket as he stepped toward the jury. His voice was smooth, confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is simple." He gestured toward Ethan without even looking at him. "We have a man who refuses to accept reality. The property in question was rightfully acquired by my client through legal foreclosure. The law is clear. The facts are irrefutable. This is not about emotions. This is about contracts, deadlines, and obligations. My client followed the law. Mr. Caldwell did not." A well-placed pause. A slow turn. Then a casual shrug. "I sympathize. Losing a home is painful. But pain does not override legal responsibility. The numbers don't lie." He nodded once toward the judge and then took his seat, hands folded as if the case was already over. Ethan sat still, unmoved. He'd expected this. But as he rose from his seat, he caught the way Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. A man watching something he didn't believe would be worth his time. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen." Ethan cleared his throat, his voice steady. "Mr. Sterling is right about one thing. The law is clear. The question is, does his client actually follow it?" A flicker of irritation crossed Sterling's face. Ethan continued. "I've spent the last 6 months studying every case, every statute, every loophole that banks and corporations use to strip homes away from families. And I found something." Judge Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Something?" Ethan nodded. "Yes. And it changes everything." Sterling let out a quiet laugh. "Oh, this should be good." Ethan ignored him. Instead, he turned to the judge. "Before I begin, Your Honor, I'd like to submit an official request for discovery because I have reason to believe the plaintiff is hiding something. The courtroom shifted. Judge Grayson sat forward, his expression less amused now. Hiding what, Mr. Caldwell? Ethan's gaze locked onto Sterling. Fraud. And just like that, the room wasn't laughing anymore. The word fraud lingered in the air like a slow-burning fuse. Sterling's smirk faded, and for the first time, Judge Grayson gave Ethan more than just a passing glance. Fraud? The judge's voice carried a note of skepticism, but there was something else beneath it. Curiosity. Ethan nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I believe the foreclosure on my grandmother's home was based on forged documents, and I can prove it, if I'm allowed to request full discovery. Sterling let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. Your Honor, this is absurd. A baseless accusation meant to stall the inevitable. The property was seized under standard foreclosure proceedings. Ethan tilted his head. Standard? He took a step forward, his voice steady. Tell me, Mr. Sterling, how standard is it for a bank to foreclose on a house when the original mortgage documents have two different signatures from the same person? The courtroom rustled. A few murmurs broke out in the gallery. Sterling's jaw clenched. What are you talking about? Ethan reached into his folder and pulled out 2 copies of the original mortgage agreement. He walked over to the bailiff and handed them up to the judge. These are 2 separate copies of the same document, Your Honor. One from the initial filing and one from a later modification. If you look at the signatures, you'll notice they don't match. Judge Grayson leaned in, scanning the papers. His forehead creased. Ethan continued. Now, I'm no expert, but I know my grandmother's signature. And that second one? That's not hers. The judge flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from dismissive to focused. He looked up at Sterling. Mr. Sterling, do you have an explanation for this? Sterling cleared his throat. Your Honor, this is an attempt to confuse the issue. Signatures can change over time. Ethan didn't let up. Maybe. But that second signature is from a document filed only 3 months after the original. And if you compare them side by side, he pointed toward the papers in the judge's hand, you'll see that not only do they look completely different, but the second one was signed the day after my grandmother was hospitalized for a stroke. A wave of reaction rippled through the courtroom. Even the jury leaned forward. Judge Grayson turned back to Sterling, his tone firmer now. Mr. Sterling, does your client have the original signed documents on file? Sterling hesitated. It was quick, barely noticeable, but Ethan saw it, and so did the judge. We would need time to retrieve them, Your Honor. Ethan smiled. That's fine. I'll wait.